December 14th, 2025. 3:17 local time, Indian Ocean. A Greek-flagged oil tanker vanishes. Not sinks, not diverts, vanishes. Its AIS transponder, the electronic heartbeat that tells the world where a commercial vessel is, goes silent mid-transit. One moment, the MV Aegean Horizon is cruising at 12 knots, 140 nautical miles off the Somali coast. The next, it's a ghost. Modern tankers don't just disappear, they carry redundant communication systems, VSAT terminals, Inmarsat connections, GMDSS distress beacons. For all of those systems to fail simultaneously requires either a catastrophic explosion or something far more deliberate. The Aegean Horizon didn't explode. Something worse happened. 3 commercial drones, modified DJI Mattress 300 platforms carrying improvised fragmentation charges, struck the tanker in a coordinated sequence that lasted 11 seconds. The first hit the main VSAT dome on the bridge roof. The second destroyed the backup Inmarsat antenna on the port side. The third detonated against the bridge windows, shredding navigation electronics and injuring 2 officers with shrapnel. In 11 seconds, a 115,000 deadweight-ton oil tanker became deaf, blind, and mute. I'm your host at Battlefront Signal, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing the most technologically sophisticated pirate attack in modern history, and the 9-hour operation that followed. Because Somali pirates just evolved, and the U.S. Navy wasn't ready. To understand how this attack was even possible, you need to understand what changed in the Gulf of Aden between 2023 and late 2025. International naval patrols shrank. The Houthi campaign against Red Sea shipping pulled warships north. Combined Maritime Forces redeployed assets from Combined Task Force 151, the dedicated counter-piracy force, to reinforce CTF 153 covering the Red Sea approaches. At its peak, CTF 151 operated with 8 to 12 warships patrolling one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. By December 2025, that number was down to 3. 3 warships covering 1.1 million square nautical miles of ocean. Somali pirate networks noticed. According to intelligence assessments compiled after the Aegean Horizon incident, pirate activity in the Indian Ocean basin increased 340% between January and November 2025. Most attacks followed the old pattern: skiffs, ladders, AK-47s. But one network was doing something different. A cell operating out of Hobyo on Somalia's central coast had been acquiring commercial drone platforms through intermediaries in Dubai. Sources familiar with the post-incident investigation described a procurement chain that moved through 3 countries. The drones were purchased legally as agricultural survey equipment. The modification, mounting fragmentation charges fabricated from PG-7 warheads stripped from RPG rounds, happened in a warehouse 40 kilometers inland from the coast. The cell conducted at least 6 test flights over a 4-month period. Satellite imagery reviewed after the attack showed scorch marks on a dry lake bed consistent with explosive drone testing. Nobody flagged it. The data sat in an NGA archive, unanalyzed because of the collection tasking prioritized Houthi drone facilities 1,500 miles to the north. This is the undetected threat problem, not a failure of technology, a failure of attention. December 14th, 2:50, 27 minutes before the drone strike. The Aegean Horizon's bridge watch officer logged a radar contact, bearing 0458 nautical miles out. Small, fast, consistent with a fishing dhow. The officer noted it in the log and returned to monitoring the navigation display. He didn't raise the alarm. Under the vessel's security protocols, a single small contact at 8 miles didn't meet the threshold for alerting the ship's master. The Best Management Practices Guide, the commercial shipping industry's counter-piracy Bible, recommends heightened vigilance when transiting the high-risk area. But the Aegean Horizon's crew had made this run 11 times in the past year without incident. Complacency. the oldest vulnerability in naval history. At 3:08, the D house stopped. It was now 6 nautical miles from the tanker, still within normal fishing behavior parameters, still below the alarm threshold. At 3:14, 3 objects launched from the Dow's deck. The bridge radar didn't detect them. Commercial marine radar isn't designed to track small, low-altitude aerial targets. The drones flew at 45 knots, 30 meters above the water. 3 minutes. That's how long the crew of the Aegean Horizon had between launch and impact. 3 minutes they didn't know existed. 3:17. Impact. The bridge officer was thrown sideways when the first charge detonated directly above him. Glass and metal fragments tore through the bridge. The second explosion, half a second later, hit the port antenna cluster. The third struck the bridge windows from a steep dive angle, sending shrapnel across the entire compartment. 2 officers suffered lacerations. The helmsman's console was destroyed. Every screen on the bridge went dark. 22 minutes later, 2 speedboats pulled alongside. 8 armed men climbed aboard using aluminum ladders hooked to the railings. No resistance, no alarm sent, no one coming to help. The pirates didn't head for the bridge first. They went below, straight to the engine control room. They knew the layout. According to reconstruction analysis, the attack cell had obtained general arrangement drawings for Suezmax-class tankers, likely purchased from a corrupt shipyard contact. Within 40 minutes, the pirates had corralled all 23 crew members into the engine room and activated the vessel's own CO2 fire suppression system as a threat. If anyone tried to escape or resist, they'd flood the compartment with carbon dioxide. Suffocation in under 4 minutes. And above the tanker, orbiting at 200 meters altitude, a 4th drone maintained a slow circuit. Improvised early warning, watching the horizon for approaching vessels. The pirates had built their own surveillance network. 1,100 nautical miles northwest in Bahrain, the Combined Maritime Forces headquarters registered the Aegean Horizon's AIS dropout at 3:24. 7 minutes after the attack, the watch officer at CMF flagged it as a potential system malfunction. AIS dropouts happen? Equipment failures, software glitches, crew accidentally switching off a transponder. The standard protocol was to attempt contact via VHF and satellite phone, then wait for the vessel to reappear. They tried both. No response. At 03:38, the watch officer escalated. The Aegean Horizon's last known position placed it in the Somali basin, inside the high-risk area. An AIS dropout combined with communication failure in that region had only one probable explanation. CTF 151's duty officer contacted the USS Laboon, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating 210 nautical miles north of the tanker's last position. The Laboon had been conducting routine patrol operations as part of the diminished counter-piracy force. Captain Sarah Okonkwo received the alert at 0341. She ordered the ship to general quarters and launched an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter within 6 minutes. The Seahawk, callsign Wardog 61, flew south at 150 knots. Overhead the Aegean Horizon at 0402, 45 minutes after the initial attack. What the helicopter crew saw through their FLIR pod changed everything. Armed individuals on deck. Crew nowhere visible. And a drone, small, hovering, clearly not belonging to any military, circling the ship at low altitude. The Seahawk's sensor operator reported, multiple armed packs on deck, no crew visible topside, unknown UAV in orbit around the vessel. This is not a standard boarding. Wardog 61 pulled back to 5 nautical miles to avoid alerting the pirates' drone. The crew relayed imagery back to the Laboon via data link. Captain Okonkwo now faced a tactical problem that had no existing playbook. VBSS. Visit, board, search, and seizure. Operations against Somali pirates had been conducted hundreds of times since 2008. The Navy had refined the procedures over thousands of hours. Approach by helicopter and RHIB. Overwhelm with speed and numbers. Secure the vessel. But none of those operations involved an adversary with aerial surveillance. The pirates' drone changed the equation. Any approach by helicopter, by boat, by swimmer would be detected. The element of surprise, the single most critical factor in hostage rescue aboard a vessel, was gone. Okonkwo contacted CTF 151 headquarters. The assessment went up the chain. Bahrain to 5th Fleet. 5th Fleet to CENTCOM. CENTCOM to the Pentagon. A question nobody had anticipated landed on desks in 4 time zones simultaneously. How do you board a ship when the pirates can see you coming? The Laboon carried a complement of 12 VBSS qualified sailors. Trained, experienced, capable. But the standard team wasn't designed for opposed boarding against an adversary with ISR capability. This required a different approach. At 5:15, CENTCOM authorized the deployment of a Navy SEAL platoon embarked on the USS Baton, an amphibious assault ship operating in the Gulf of Aden, 380 nautical miles to the north. The SEALs couldn't reach the Aegean horizon for at least 7 hours by helicopter relay. An MV-22 Osprey launched from the Baton at 5:40, carrying a 16-man platoon with specialized equipment. The Osprey would need to refuel at a forward operating location in Djibouti before making the final leg. 7 hours. That was the window the pirates had to consolidate, negotiate, or disappear. Meanwhile, the Aegean horizon began moving. At 6:20, the tanker's engines restarted. Course 220 degrees, heading toward the Somali coast. Speed: 8 knots. At that rate, the pirates would reach territorial waters in approximately 14 hours. Once inside Somali territorial waters, the legal and tactical picture shifted dramatically. International naval forces operated under strict rules of engagement regarding sovereignty. An armed boarding inside another nation's waters required diplomatic authorization that could take days. The clock was running in 2 directions. SEALs inbound from the north. Somali coastline approaching from the west. The math was tight. At 8:30, a P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft arrived on station from its base in Djibouti. The P-8 carried sensors the Seahawk didn't. Synthetic aperture radar, a full signals intelligence suite, and the ability to loiter for hours. The P-8 crew immediately focused on the pirate drone. They tracked its flight pattern for 40 minutes. The drone followed a predictable elliptical orbit, 800 meters long, 400 meters wide, completing one circuit every 3 minutes and 20 seconds. It maintained a consistent altitude of 180 to 220 meters. The intelligence officer aboard the P-8 identified the drone as a modified commercial platform with an estimated battery life of 35 to 45 minutes per charge. The pirates were rotating batteries. Every 30 minutes, the drone descended to the deck, a pirate swapped the battery pack, and it relaunched. During the battery swap, the tanker had no aerial surveillance for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds. That was the gap. The SEALs planning cell aboard the Osprey received this intelligence in flight. They began building an assault plan around a 90-second window that occurred once every half hour. But there was a complication: the hostages. At 9:15, the pirates made contact. Using the tanker's emergency VHF radio, the one system the drone strikes hadn't destroyed because it was located in the steering gear room, not the bridge, a man identifying himself as Commander Abdi demanded $7 million for the vessel and crew. He also made a specific threat. If any military vessel approached within 5 nautical miles, the CO2 suppression system would be activated. 23 crew. 4 minutes of breathable air. Commander Okonkwo, now the on-scene coordinator, relayed the threat assessment. The hostage situation compressed every tactical option. A forced boarding risked mass casualties. A standoff negotiation gave the pirates time to reach Somali waters. Disabling the vessel's engines with gunfire risked hull penetration on a loaded oil tanker. 800,000 barrels of crude. The P-8 crew ran thermal imaging on the engine room. They confirmed 23 heat signatures clustered in a space designed for 5 people. The crew was alive, but the CO2 system was a real threat. The P-8's sensors detected the suppression system's pressure gauges reading full. Comment, Storm, if you think the Navy should have boarded immediately despite the CO2 threat. At 14:30, the SEAL platoon arrived. The Osprey landed on the Laboon's flight deck after the refueling stop in Djibouti. The platoon leader, identified in after-action reports only as Lieutenant Commander Reese, received a full briefing. The plan that emerged was built around three simultaneous actions. First, neutralize the drone. The Laboon carried an AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite. The system could jam commercial drone control frequencies, but jamming had to be timed precisely. If the drone was jammed while airborne and crashed onto the tanker's deck, it could alert the pirates or, worse, detonate any remaining ordnance. The solution was to jam during a battery swap. When the drone was on deck being serviced, kill the control link. The drone wouldn't fly again, and the pirates would initially assume a technical malfunction rather than military intervention. Second, covert approach. During the same battery swap window, two SEAL fire teams would approach from the stern using combat rubber raiding craft. The tanker's hull rose 18 meters from the waterline, too high for standard boarding ladders. The SEALs would use caving ladders with magnetic anchor points, climbing the hull on the vessel's blind side while the pirates' attention was focused forward. Third, engine room breach. A separate two-man element would enter through the engine room's ventilation trunk, a narrow shaft running from the weather deck down to the machinery spaces. Their sole mission was to reach the CO2 suppression controls and disable the system before the pirates could activate it. The ventilation trunk was 22 inches in diameter. The SEALs would be squeezing through in full kit. One man got stuck during rehearsal aboard the Laboon and had to strip his plate carrier to continue. They trained the approach 4 times in 3 hours, using the destroyer's own engineering spaces. At 1800, the Aegean horizon was 67 nautical miles from the Somali coast, at 8 knots, less than 9 hours from territorial waters. The operation was set for the next battery swap after full darkness. 21:47, sunset. The P-8 continued tracking the drone's pattern. Battery swaps had occurred at predictable intervals throughout the day, but the timing had drifted. The gap between swaps ranged from 26 to 34 minutes. The SEALs needed the pattern to hold. 23:12. The drone descended for a battery swap. The Laboon's electronic warfare team activated the jammer. Frequency range, 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz, the standard control bands for DJI platforms. The jam was clean. The drone sat on deck. It didn't relaunch. On the tanker, a pirate examined the drone, tried the controller. Nothing. He shouted to another man on the bridge wing, a discussion. Troubleshooting. That discussion bought the SEALs 90 seconds. 2 CRRCs had been in the water since 2240, drifting on the current with engines off, 1,200 meters astern of the tanker. At the jam signal, both boats started electric motors and closed the distance at 6 knots. Silent approach. No wake visible on thermal. The first CRRC reached the tanker's stern at 23:14. Magnetic anchors deployed. Caving ladder up. 4 SEALs ascending the hull. The second CRRC positioned alongside the port quarter. The ventilation team, 2 operators, identified the vent trunk access hatch. It was dogged shut with 2 butterfly bolts. 30 seconds to open. 23:16. First fire team on deck. They moved forward along the starboard side, staying below the bulwark line. Night vision active. Suppressed rifles. 23:17. Ventilation team inside the trunk. Descending. The pirates had posted 2 sentries on the main deck. 1 forward near the bow, 1 amidships near the manifold valves. Both were facing outward, scanning the horizon. Neither looked aft. Without the drone, their surveillance perimeter had collapsed to what they could see with their eyes, which at night was almost nothing. 23:19. The amidship sentry turned. He walked aft toward the accommodation block. The first fire team froze against the hull. The sentry passed within 8 meters. He didn't look down. 23:21. The ventilation team reached the engine room level. Through the vent grating, they could see the hostages. sitting on the deck plates guarded by 2 pirates. The CO2 suppression panel was on the forward bulkhead. 1 pirate sat within arm's reach of the manual activation lever. This was the critical vulnerability. If that lever was pulled before the SEALs could intervene, the engine room would flood with CO2 in under 60 seconds. At the concentration required to suppress fire, human consciousness would last approximately 90 seconds. Death would follow within 4 minutes. The ventilation team communicated to Reese via encrypted whisper comms. The CO2 panel had to be the first target. Not the pirates on deck, not the bridge. The suppression system. 23-24. All elements in position. Reese gave the execute order. The ventilation grate blew inward, a small breaching charge precisely calibrated. The 2 SEALs dropped into the engine room. The pirate nearest the CO2 panel reached for the lever. He was 3 inches from the handle when the first round struck him. The second guard raised his weapon. He never completed the motion. Simultaneously, the first fire team breached the accommodation block. 3 pirates inside, 2 in a common room, 1 in the corridor. The corridor pirate fired a burst from an AK-47 that punched through a bulkhead and struck a fire extinguisher. No SEAL casualties. The pirate was neutralized in the return fire. The bridge. 2 pirates remained, including Commander Abdi. They had barricaded the bridge door with furniture. The second fire team, which had ascended via a separate ladder on the port side, reached the bridge wing. Abdi was on the radio, screaming in Somali, calling for the sentry on the bow. The sentry was already face down on the forecastle, flex-cuffed, secured by a third element that had swept forward during the breach. 23-28. The bridge door was breached with a shotgun slug to the hinges. Abdi dropped the radio. He held no weapon. The second pirate had an RPG-7 shouldered, pointed at the bridge door. The SEAL entering first saw the RPG tube and fired. The pirate collapsed. The rocket, a PG-7VL round, discharged into the overhead, punching through the bridge roof without detonating. An armed warhead, exiting through the ceiling, spinning into the dark sky above the Indian Ocean. Abdi was secured at 23-29. The operation from first breach to last pirate neutralized lasted 5 minutes and 12 seconds, but it wasn't over. During the engine room breach, the small explosive charge had ignited oil residue on the vent trunk walls. A fire started in the ventilation system. Small at first, but on a tanker carrying 800,000 barrels of crude, any fire is an emergency. The ship's crew, now freed, responded. The chief engineer directed firefighting efforts using portable equipment. The Laboon's damage control team arrived by RHIB at 23:45 to assist. The fire was contained by 0:15 on December 15th. It had burned through 12 meters of ventilation ductwork without reaching any cargo spaces. A margin of 4 meters separated the fire from the inert gas system piping that connected to the cargo tanks. 4 meters. That was the distance between a successful rescue and a catastrophic explosion. Subscribe if you want to see how the Navy adapts to the next generation of pirate tactics. All 8 pirates were captured alive, 6 wounded, 1 critically, the man near the CO2 panel. Commander Abdi was uninjured. He was transferred to the Laboon's brig and subsequently handed over to Kenyan authorities for prosecution under the 2011 piracy agreement. The 23 crew members of the Aegean Horizon survived. 2 bridge officers required surgery for shrapnel wounds at the U.S. military hospital in Djibouti. The helmsman lost partial hearing in his left ear. No SEALs were wounded. The RPG round that exited through the bridge roof was later recovered floating in the ocean, 340 meters from the tanker. Its fuse had armed but failed to detonate on impact with the thin steel of the bridge ceiling. Ordnance analysis determined the fuse was a Chinese-manufactured copy with a known reliability defect, a defective fuse. That was the margin between mission success and a SEAL killed by an RPG inside a ship's bridge. The aftermath extended far beyond the Indian Ocean. At the Pentagon, the Aegean Horizon incident triggered a classified review of counter-piracy doctrine. The review's central finding, according to sources familiar with the document, was blunt. Existing VBSS procedures assumed pirates with small arms and ladders. The drone-enabled attack represented a generational leap in pirate capability that existing training hadn't accounted for. CTF-151 received authorization to increase its patrol force from 3 warships to 7. The redeployment pulled assets from the Red Sea, a trade-off that left CTF-153 with reduced coverage of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait during the first 2 weeks of January 2026. Plugging one gap opened another. The International Maritime Organization convened an emergency session in February 2026 to address what delegates called the drone piracy threshold. The session produced recommendations but no binding regulations. Flag states disagreed on whether commercial vessels should be permitted to carry counter-drone systems. The Greek delegation pushed for immediate authorization. The Chinese delegation blocked it, citing concerns about armed merchant vessels in international waters. Commercially, insurance premiums for vessels transiting the Indian Ocean high-risk area increased by 28% in the quarter following the attack. 3 major tanker operators temporarily rerouted vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 12 days and approximately $480,000 in fuel costs per voyage. And in Hobyo, satellite surveillance detected new activity at the warehouse where the drones had been modified. Different vehicles, different faces, but the same pattern. The cell that attacked the Aegean horizon was neutralized, but the capability had proliferated. Commercial drones cost $12,000. RPG warheads cost $50 on the Somali black market. The total investment for the attack, drones, explosives, speedboats, fuel, was estimated at under $85,000. The tanker's cargo was worth $64 million. That ratio, $85,000 to threaten $64 million, is the number that keeps maritime security planners awake. Because it means piracy just became economically rational again, not the desperate, disorganized raids of 2008. Something more calculated, technology-enabled, scalable. The U.S. Navy proved it could neutralize the threat once, in one operation, against one vessel, with SEALs, a destroyer, a P-8, and 9 hours of planning. There are 50,000 commercial vessels transiting the Indian Ocean annually. The Aegean Horizon operation succeeded. Barely. A defective Chinese fuse saved a SEAL's life. 4 meters of ductwork separated a fire from a floating bomb. A 90-second battery swap was the only window into a defended ship. The Navy adapted, the pirates will adapt back. And somewhere in a warehouse on the Somali coast, someone is watching drone tutorials on YouTube. That's the war now. Not fleet against fleet, not missile against missile. A $12,000 drone against a $64 million tanker. And the math only works in one direction.